All right, that was all really good stuff. Okay, so let's move into the other thing here. This is not your class. This is your class. Okay. All right. Now, if I remember correctly, we did talk about some of the economics as well, right? Is that correct? Did we do that with you guys or not? You guys are looking at me like you don't know. What's the last thing we covered?
We ended on the, like, at least I think we ended on just the sexism and women getting recruited.
This is the last thing we did?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we did not do this at all. All right. Well, let's do it. Oh, that's right. Because we were talking about the prompts for the tests and stuff. Okay. All right. So let's do this. Okay. So we're now moving into this kind of like end stage of apartheid, all through the 70s and 80s, where apartheid, the problems with apartheid are starting to become so bad that apartheid is going to collapse, right? It's all kind of downhill from here. All right. So one of this pressure to end apartheid is coming from industry and business. From industry and business. Now we've talked about this for a while, that industry and business have kind of a really conflicted relationship with apartheid, right? That they're not 100% on board with apartheid, and it's going to show. Okay, so one of the biggest issues that industry has is that they need cheap workers, and they need those cheap workers to live nearby, right? But apartheid is constantly trying to push them away, push them into the countryside, right? The question you should be asking is what changes in the 1970s? So here you go. In your notes, you put what changed in the 1970s. We're going to have a couple of big changes. The first change is something called deindustrialization. Deindustrialization. Now, do any of you guys remember back to AP Geography? What is deindustrialization? Alicia, do you remember what it is?
No.
No. If I tell you the United States reached a point of deindustrialization in 1952, what does that mean? Yeah, Rachikanda?
Isn't it just a decline in industrial activity in like a region or like an economy?
Yeah, it's specifically the decline in industrial workers, right? So deindustrialization is the point at which workers stop working in factories and start working in service industries, right? They start moving into different kinds of jobs. Now, why are we deindustrializing? Why are all countries in the world deindustrializing? We just don't want factories anymore. What's the reason why? Ilha, why's the reason why? Why are we deindustrializing?
Some things become like a lot cheaper from like to import abroad, or like some countries become specialized.
Okay, so sometimes, right, that's where you're exporting the factories, right? So we shut down an American factory and open one up in India or something like that, right? Yeah, so that's part of it, but there's a bigger reason. Yash, you know why?
Is it just improvements in technology and like machinery?
Yep, 100%. So in your notes, you need to put deindustrialization. South Africa starts the process of deindustrialization because of computers and more sophisticated, I can't speak, computers and more sophisticated machinery, okay? And we're specifically talking about the mines. Okay, so they're getting better and better machines, and those better machines require fewer workers, right? So this is one problem. Okay, so you're just losing workers. The next problem here is that all of the easy stuff to mine has been already mined. They got all the easy stuff. So now they're trying to get more difficult mines, right? They have to go to new locations. They have to dig deeper. They have to dig, in different angles. They have to dig through different kinds of materials, right? The mines, it's just more difficult, okay? So it's more difficult and you have better equipment. The result is, and this is the third thing that changed, The mines now need better quality workers. They need workers who know how to read, and they need workers who know how to do math, right? Because it's not enough just to be a strong dude who can pick up rocks. That's not enough anymore. You now have to be a strong dude who can pick up rocks and a guy who can like diagnose a machine that's broken, right? A guy who can fix the machine and get it working again, who can like change the parameters of the computer program when the machine hits a different kind of rock, right? Like you just need people who can do math and read. And the Black Africans can't do either. So the result here is that the industry starts having to open up schools, and they have to start opening up hospitals, and they have to start opening up services that the government isn't paying for. Right? So the mines are operating schools, the mines are operating hospitals, the mines are operating a lot of these things, and the mines are looking at the government going, what the hell, government? Aren't you the ones who are supposed to be doing this? Aren't you the one who's supposed to be running a school system? But you're running such a crappy school system that I'm having to do this here as my mine. I'm losing money. Right? Does that make sense to you guys? The mines are pretty upset that they're having to pay for a bunch of crap that they think the government should pay for. All right. The other really, really big problem that South Africa is facing is a problem of a small domestic market. And this is your next big bullet point here. A small domestic market. When I say that there's a small domestic market, what do I mean? Oh, I forgot one thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we do the small domestic market, there's one more that goes in the deindustrialization section, right? The deindustrialization is also facing a global depression. The entire world is having an economic depression. Okay? The United States is hitting a really bad depression, the second worst depression in its history, right? And so is Europe. And during a global depression, the first thing that people stop buying is luxury goods, which includes diamonds. So the South African diamond industry has been gutted in the 1970s, right? They're cut in half. They're selling half as many diamonds or less. People just don't buy diamonds, and they're not buying gold and platinum and silver. They're not buying luxury stuff anymore. And that makes sense, right? If I'm struggling to feed my kids, if I'm struggling to put gas in my car, I'm not going to go buy diamonds, right? And that's the entire globe is like that. And it's deindustrialization is hitting the whole planet at the same time, right? The United States is hitting this huge, massive unemployment, and the United States is getting this point where it's like 15% unemployment, and it's because all of our factories have shut down. And all those factory workers are out of business. This is where like Detroit collapses into nothing, right? This is one of the propelling causes of all these like race riots and stuff like that. Okay, it's also where the U.S. is going to start being super anti-immigrant and stuff like that. It's all coming out of this problem. All right, let's go down to market, the domestic market. Okay, South Africa has a teeny tiny little domestic market. Now, when I say a domestic market, we need to figure out what it is I'm talking about. Okay, Michael Zong, do you know what I'm talking about when if I say the United States has a big economy because of its robust domestic market? What does that mean?
I guess just a bunch of people in the U.S. want to buy like stuff, I guess.
Okay, that's not bad. Yeah, that's not a bad way to think about it, right? The domestic market is that you just have a lot of customers in your country that want to buy your stuff, right? Another way to say that is the United States economy is dynamic because it has such a huge middle class. What you need is that middle class. Okay? The United States has about 70% of its population, 60 to 70% of its population is what we call middle class. And the middle class are people who are financially stable enough not to be worried about like their day-to-day security, like they're not having to worry about food and shelter, right? They're financially stable enough to have that, but they also have enough money to buy stuff they want, right? I don't have to worry about food. I can afford to buy a PlayStation, right? That's the middle class, right? If I'm struggling to buy food, I'm not middle class, I'm poor, right? But if I have food, I have shelter, I have, you know, electricity, I have all the basic needs done, and I still have money left over to, you know, upgrade my car or to buy some nice clothes or to buy a diamond ring or buy a PlayStation or, you know, go see the movies and stuff like that, right? Then I'm middle class. Okay. South Africa has almost no middle class. South Africa has one of the smallest middle classes in the world at this point. Right? What's the white population of South Africa? They're like 15%, right? Of that 15%, about half of them are middle class. So that means we're dealing with somewhere around 7% of the country is their middle class. But the Black population of South Africa is so poor that they can't really afford anything. They can't afford to go to the movies. They can't afford to go buy a new dress. They can't afford to buy perfume. They can't afford to, you know, go to the mall on Saturday. They can't afford to do those things because they're so poor. Okay. The next thing you need here is consumerism breeds consumerism. In an economic sense, we call this a virtuous cycle. Okay. Consumerism breeds consumerism. When I buy tickets to go see a movie in the theater, I'm not just supporting that movie theater. I'm supporting the film industry. I'm supporting the popcorn industry. I'm supporting the advertising industry. I'm supporting the, you know, gasoline industry because I drove my car to the theater, right? I'm supporting, you know, and the movie industry supports, you know, all of these other industries that are attached to it, right? If I go out to a restaurant, I'm not just supporting the restaurant. I'm supporting the farms and the distribution and the delivery people and the cooking people and the gas people and the, you know what I mean? Like I'm supporting all of those people. Consumerism breeds consumerism, but you have to have people that have a level of disposable income or it doesn't work. And South Africa doesn't have that. Okay. Here's the last thing that's attached to this. If Black people in South Africa can't afford to buy stuff, right? They can't afford to buy anything, but they still need things. What is the natural next thing that's going to happen? I still want new shoes. I can't afford shoes, but I want new shoes. So what do?
Make them?
Make them? Maybe. Maybe
Steal
I can
them.
make them. Steal them is where we're going to go, right? The problem with make them is that decades ago they ran out of stuff, right? So make them becomes really hard if I can't find the stuff to make them. Steal them is the answer that we're getting to. South Africa is going to have one of the largest Black markets on the planet. And that's because Black South Africa can't buy anything. And the Black market, by some accounts, it's really hard to count Black market stuff, Black market activity, but by a lot of accounts, the South African Black market is roughly the same size as the entire South African economy. Right? So something like 50% of all commerce, of all commercial goods are Black market items in South Africa. This gets into some really weird stuff. It's some real tricky stuff of like how you count what the Black market is, right? Like if your mom calls me up and says, hey, Mr. Veenstra, I'll pay you money to go tutor my boy, right? And so I stop by your house after school and I tutor your boy, right? But I don't report that to the government, I don't pay taxes on it. Is that part of the Black market? Kind of, maybe, right? Like it's kind of illegal, but it's also like not very much money. And it's also like, you know, I didn't steal anything. You know what I mean? So this depends on how we're counting this. For the purposes of South Africa, I want you to understand the Black market to mean the sale of goods that is propelled by murder and thievery. Okay? I'm talking about people popping out, pulling a gun on a delivery truck, shooting the driver, stealing the truck, driving it into the slums, and then selling the contents. That's what I'm talking I'm not talking about like a teacher just kind of not reporting taxes on like tutoring, Michael. Like, like that's not, that is happening as well, but that's not really what we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with like murdering the truck driver, driving the truck over and selling the contents. That's what we're dealing with, right? White people in Cape Town would have bought those shoes for $200. I drive them into the slum and sell them for 20 bucks, right? That's what we're dealing with, okay? And the black market in South Africa is massive, okay? The murder rate in South Africa is one of the highest murder rates in the world at this time period, okay? One of the highest murder rates in the world. The slums of Johannesburg is one of the most dangerous places on the planet at this time period, okay? One of the most dangerous. We're talking like at least equally as dangerous as the direct delivery lines of the Mexican cartels. Right? Mexico itself is marginally dangerous. The like 30-mile strip of land that the cartels control and deliver everything through is extremely dangerous. You should stay away from that 30-mile strip of land, right? You can go visit Cancun or whatever and you'll be fine, but stay away from that 30-mile strip of land through Sinaloa. You should not go there. That would be very dangerous for you. South Africa is like that. Every city is basically ringed with like black market murder zones. Okay? Do we understand the economic problems? Do we have questions about the economic problems? Okay, let's move to the next one. All right, so the next one here is going to be education. All right, there's a huge education backlash. So let's first kind of diagnose the problem, right? So the problem with South Africa, as I've already mentioned, is the education sucks. It's terrible. It's terrible. And most of those slums have no schools or barely any schools or really kind of unofficial schools, unofficial schools that are, doing the best they can, but they have no resources, right? The result here is the literacy rate for Black South Africa is only about 30%. The literacy rate is only about 30%. That means only about 30% of the Black people can read. And when they define read, it would be the equivalent of being able to read on the equivalent of a 9th grade level. That's the way they define it, okay? About 30% literacy and about 30% math literacy, right? So which means that about 2/3 of South African Blacks can only do addition and subtraction, and they can't even do multiplication or division without help, right? So for most of them, math class was counting. And once you learned how to count, you were done. That was it. So there's no algebra, no calculus, no anything like that, right? No advanced mathematics at all, which is a problem for the minds. Now that you're operating a computer, this is a real problem. You need to know some math, right? Okay, so this is our context that we're dealing with. There are some universities, okay? There are some universities, and this is where this really, truly remarkable man is going to enter our story, Steve Biko. Steve Biko is the gentleman in the picture here. He is a college activist. He's a college activist. There are some colleges, not very many, but for every Black person who goes to college, there's like 100 white people that go, right? So there's a few, not many. Steve Biko is one of these minds that's kind of like a once in a century kind of brain, right? He's a once in a century kind of really remarkably intelligent, remarkably smart person, okay? He organizes something called the South African Students Organization. And this is a college student organization that very quickly starts to open up in colleges all over the country, okay? Mostly Black membership, but they also get white and colored membership as well, right? And they basically are trying to end apartheid. Biko writes a series of books. He writes about 24 books. He writes about 24 books and hundreds of essays. And they're all centering around this concept of Black consciousness. Black consciousness. Now, those of you who have studied the American Civil Rights Movement are going to find this to be very similar. Americans call it Black Power. Americans call it the Black Power movement. South Africans call it the Black Consciousness movement. They're very, very similar movements. And Biko is straight up referencing Malcolm X. He's referencing a lot of the American thinkers, right? Biko is directly referencing a lot of the Black American thinkers, okay? What this says is, Black consciousness is the statement that that race affects all aspects of your psychology. Race affects all aspects of your psychology, and that in order to improve yourself, you must first recognize the racial impact and neutralize it. So race affects all aspects of psychology, everything. And in order to improve yourself, you must first recognize the racial component and neutralize that component. Otherwise, you can't improve anything. And we're talking about every psychological problem out there, right? Everything from like your ability to make friends, your ability to find a spouse, your ability to consume alcohol without getting out of control, your ability to be a criminal or not a criminal, your ability to believe in God, right? All of these things, everything has race on it, okay? This movement is a very powerful movement. The Black Power movement's already pretty powerful in America anyway, and now it's like gangbusters in South Africa. It starts to spread through the slums. It starts to spread through the Bantustans. It starts to spread across the country, and we're going to start getting student protests and student organized protests that are organized by college students, but also is going to include like teenagers and high school level students, right? The thing about college students is that they have a very low tolerance for like traditional bullshit, right? And college students also have the ability to go out and protest pretty well because college students, you know, don't have other things going on in their lives, right? They can go out and protest. You're not going to get someone like me to protest, right? I got a mortgage and a wife and I got a kid and I got a dog and I got stuff to do and I already had to work all week and I'm really tired and it's kind of hot and I don't even have hair, so I'm going to get all sunburned if I go out there, right? Like I'm kind of hungry, my joints hurt, right? Like I'm not a protesting guy. You're not going to get me to protest. You're going to get people who are like you guys, right? You guys are all young. You don't really, you know, have anything else going on in your lives, and so you go protest, right? You also have the most to lose, right? You guys need to solve this problem now, otherwise you're going to become me, right? And look at this. You want to avoid this as much as you can, right? Right? All right, Michael Lou, you don't need to agree that much. All right, so, all right. Steve Biko is murdered by the police. Steve Biko is murdered by the police at age 25. I'm telling you, this guy was a remarkable man. He wrote like 24 books before the age 25. He wrote 24 books and organized the largest student protesting in the entire country and started an intellectual movement while the cops were targeting him before the age 25. He's a pretty remarkable dude. When I say the cops killed him, the most accurate way to say this is the cops arrested him without any cause, stripped him down naked, tortured him, traveled him in the back of a truck to another side of the country, stopping to torture and beat him naked. Eventually did so much damage that blood was getting into his spinal cord and blood was getting into his brain. And then they let him die in the back of a truck, the bed of a truck. That's the most accurate way to say what happened to him. Okay? The cops straight up murdered him. And they murdered him because of this. Here's the last thing we're going to do. The Soweto uprising. I told you we had one more act of mass violence that we were going to deal with, and here it is. So Soweto is one of the slums, and we have an uprising here where we're going to get thousands and thousands of college students, all of them inspired by Biko, all of them using signs with his name on it, his face on it, quotes from him on it, right? And they're out here declaring that they are independent of the whites defining them. The police do what you 100% expect them to do. The police start to attack the crowd, and they open fire on the crowd. 1976, Biko is dead already at this point. And they open fire on the crowd. The official number that they say in South Africa is that 176 died. The actual number is a lot closer to 700. If you look at the pictures, you can just count bodies. It's more than 176 bodies. Okay. Somewhere around 700 died, and somewhere around 4,000 get injured. But again, this number could easily be, 6,000 or 7,000. We don't know. Okay. This mass violence is going to cause backlash. The groups are not going to back down. They're going to continue to protest. Other groups are going to join them in the protest. These protests are not going to go away. Protests are going to become basically a weekly occurrence in South Africa for the next 15 years. And they're going to continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time we get to the end of apartheid, the protests are hundreds of thousands of people. Not like 5,000, hundreds of thousands of people. We're going to get protests that are going to be millions of people by the end of this. Okay. But Soweto, in the past, this massive police brutality had shut things down. But at this point in time, Black consciousness has opened up everybody, and Black consciousness is getting them to go. Okay. All right. So I'm assuming that none of you have done the reading yet. Is that correct? Is that correct? Give me a thumbs up if I'm correct. You have not done the reading. Yeah. All right. So I posted the reading today. I meant to post it yesterday, and I just forgot. And then this morning I was like, okay. Right. So I posted it today. This is a reading on Black consciousness. And in class, we read it today in class, and we were going over it. I would like you to pay attention to defining what Black consciousness is. I'm sorry, you guys are going to take a quiz on this on Tuesday, and it's coming from this reading. I want you, in your quiz, I want you to be able to define Black consciousness, and I particularly want to focus on what the reading here is talking about, Black consciousness being mutual, being group. That the nature of it being for a group as opposed to being for an individual. Okay, that he talks a lot about that in the reading. He talks a lot about it in the reading, and I want you to focus on that. That's a really important thing that I want you to understand. Okay. All right. We can have some discussion on this on Tuesday. And if you come and you read it, try to understand it, highlight parts you don't understand, and come up with some questions. On Tuesday, we'll do a conversation about it, and then you'll take the quiz after that, okay? Yes? If you guys come at me with no one has read it and you're all just waiting for me to give you the answers, then I'll just let you take the test. But if you read it and you have some questions, then we'll discuss it. Cool? All right, do any of you guys have questions about the stuff we've covered?
So that quiz you're talking about for Tuesday isn't the South African quiz 5, right?
This one will be SAQ 5. That'll be next week. The one I want you to take today is SAQ 4. Is that right?
Oh, right.
Did I get the number right? I think that's right. Yeah, today is SAQ 4 and the code is reindeer. Okay. I know Yuja, you were late, so you didn't get that, but now you know. SAQ 4, the code is reindeer. Cool? And make sure you get the test done tonight. So do the quiz and the test tonight. Cool? Do we have questions, problems, comments? Okay. If you don't have any other